Coming up on Transformers University. Way back in episodes 50 through 52, we took an in-depth look at Transformers the movie. Now, we're going to take a look at the 1986 Marvel Comics adaptation of that film. We'll talk about what was different, what stayed the same, and how it impacted the story right now on Transformers University. Hello, my friend, and welcome to Transformers University. I am your host, Anthony Brucali, owner, operator, madman behind TFU.INFO, the Toy Archive, the website, this podcast, the social media, and so much more. And I welcome you to another installment of Transformers University. This is episode number 72. And this time around, we're going to be talking about the Marvel Comics adaptation of Transformers, the movie. Now, if you're unfamiliar with our coverage of Transformers, the movie, I do encourage you to go back to episodes 50 and 51, where we broke down the movie. We talked to a ton of people about their favorite moments in the film, and we compared it to the storyboards and earlier versions of the film. And also, I encourage you to listen to episode 52, where I sat down with an old friend, J.C. Reifenberg, filmmaker and podcaster, proprietor of the Scum and Villainy Cantina in Hollywood, California. And we did a lot on Transformers, the movie. So the fun thing here is that we don't necessarily need to talk much about the plot or the story as far as its effects on the Transformers universe. However, there are a lot of differences in this comic, and we will be getting to those. But first, I just want to give a shout out to all of our Patreon students, our Patreon subscribers. A quick reminder that we are only 2 more patrons away from our first goal of 25, where I will go back and re-edit the first 3 episodes of Transformers University as full video versions. So for as little as $1 a month, you can join the Patreon, and for a couple bucks more, you can get some of our exclusive podcasts, actually access to all of our exclusive podcasts, plus polls and chances to be on the show. There's lots of ways you can participate with TFU.INFO. So with that said, we're going to jump into our topic for this episode: Marvel Comics adaptation of Transformers, the movie. So before we get into issue 1, let's talk a little bit about what this is overall. So from what I could tell and what I can gather from TF Wiki, our friends over at tfwiki.net, this is an adaptation of an earlier script of the film, because the comic version came out the same month. The first issue, number 1 here, that we'll talk about in just a second, came out in August of 1986, which coincides with the film's release in North America. Now, this is an adaptation of an earlier script, as I just said, and so there's definitely some minor differences and some major differences. Some of these differences are certainly due to that older script and how things changed during the production process of the film. Some of it is due to the comics medium itself. So some of the things that make Transformers, the movie, the actual film, resonate with people: the soundtrack, some of the scene changes, some of the things, just the physical actions, the fight sequences, the animation. Can't do that in comics because it's static. It's on a printed page, right? So they have to adapt some of that stuff in a different way. So because of that, and because of the earlier script, this is almost a different telling of the same story. So it's kind of a universe unto itself. It doesn't exist in the cartoon continuity, and it doesn't exist in the Marvel US or UK comics continuity. So this is kind of its own little pocket universe. So keep that in mind, that these characters and these iterations of some of our favorites really do only exist in these 3 issues of the comic. And so let's talk about issue number 1, which features a really cool-looking cover. It's based very much on the movie poster, with Ultra Magnus and a bunch of the Autobots firing up into the sky in the shadow of Unicron. Well, actually, the top part of Unicron and the upper portion of the frame, and the Decepticons kind of being a ring around that. And everyone is kind of miscolored. The Decepticons are all in just shades of purple. Ultra Magnus has entirely red boots instead of blue and red combo, or blue and white and red combo. Hot Rod is a magenta with some blue accents. Cup has a blue face and gray accents, and then RC and Springer are also kind of differently colored as well. It's a very well drawn, even if it is miscolored version of these characters. But the neat thing here would be that we've never seen we've never seen toy versions of these colorations. Something to keep in mind as generations, the toy line continues on. I've never seen fans clamoring for these, but some of these probably look really cool in physical form. Now, the production team for this issue and all 3 issues, the adaptor, as we will call him, because he's not the writer, he's adapting the film script, is Ralph Macchio, spelt the same as Ralph Macchio, the Karate Kid. Pencils by Don Perlin, inks by Ian Aiken and Brian Garvey, letters by Janice Chang, colors by Nell Yomtov, and edits on this by Bob Budiansky. And if you remember the name Ralph Macchio from a previous episode, you have to go all the way back to the single digits of this show, because he was the person who co-wrote Marvel Comics Transformers US #1. Now, this the story starts the same way. It starts with Unicron and his attack on Lithone, though it's not shown as him eating Lithone. It's shown as this like mystical gas that destroys things, and we do meet Kranix, but he does not take a ship to leave the planet. He actually transforms into a spaceship kind of mode and leaves on his own power. The story then shifts back to Cybertron, and Optimus Prime sends Ironhide on his mission to Earth. Laserbeak is spying, but not in his bird mode. He is spying in his cassette mode at a cassette deck conveniently located in the Autobot base. The story continues on pretty much like the movie. The Decepticons find out from Laserbeak what the Autobots are up to, and we cut to Prowl and Ironhide and company flying through space. And actually, this scene features them talking about the asteroid field and ice chunks, which was in an earlier draft of the script and is in the storyboards, I believe. I mentioned that way back in episode 50. The Decepticons then attack. There's no music, no instruments of destruction playing here, but you'll hear it in your head when you read it. I guarantee it. And there's this basically a single panel for everyone who gets shot, and they all get shot in the chest or the midsection. So Brawn not taking one to the shoulder this time around. But the thing missing from this scene is there's no portion of the scene where Megatron finishes off Ironhide by shooting him in the face. Megatron does not say, "Such heroic nonsense," and then fire his gun into Ironhide's face. That's all cut out. And then back on Earth, we get Hot Rod and Daniel fishing. They go to watch the shuttle land, but the shuttle lands and then the Decepticons leave. And that's when Daniel notices what's going on. They don't see the hole in the shuttle as it's flying. They see the hole in the shuttle when it lands, and the Battle of Autobot City begins. From here, the story pretty much continues on like the movie. The Autobots are informed. Ultra Magnus gives his orders. RC and Springer set off to transform Autobot City. They are not strafed by Starscream in this scene, though. And as Autobot City transforms, the script actually refers to it as Fortress Maximus. It turns out, at least according to TF Wiki, that Fortress Maximus was a working name prior to finally naming the toy Metroplex, but it was a working name for Metroplex, and prior to that, Omega Supreme. From there, the Constructicons form Devastator. The Dinobots arrive. There's no launcher scene where RC and Springer and then Cup and Hot Rod have to move the launcher into place, though we do see Devastator get hit with a bomb at one point. But that means no dead Wheeljack or Windcharger. We then get the fight of Optimus and Megatron, and a lot of things missing from here, such as this very historic and very much reused Transformers dialogue.
One shall stand, one shall fall.
We also don't get interference from Hot Rod in the scene, so Hot Rod doesn't get into Prime's fight. Megatron just asks for mercy and then snatches a gun. But the ending is pretty much the same. You get Optimus going never, and Optimus and Megatron both basically falling at the same time. One of the big things missing from issue 1 and from the first third of this story is Cup is not in this story. So Hot Rod is, but Cup is not. RC actually has his line of talking about Prime turning the tide of the fight as the Decepticons flee aboard Astro Train. Now, the death of Optimus Prime, he passes the Matrix to Ultra Magnus, but there's no foreshadowing of Hot Rod catching the Matrix as Ultra Magnus drops it. And so there's no real, clue here that Hot Rod is going to become Rodimus Prime. Also, the Matrix doesn't look like the Matrix does in the cartoon. It is just a green sphere. Aboard Astro Train, he says that they've got to
jettison some weight, or I'll never make it to Cybertron.
Yes, we know he meant mass, but he still said jettison some weight. But there's also no fight for leadership aboard Astro Train. All the damaged Decepticons are tossed, including Megatron. Megatron and company end up on Unicron. And, they get their deal going. And it's, for the proceed on your way to oblivion portion, instead of Unicron trying to suck Megatron into that maw of his in planet form, he unleashes the gas that we saw at the beginning of the issue. So Megatron strikes his deal, but the difference in this book versus the film, Megatron is not turned into Galvatron first. It actually happens in the other order. Cyclonus and Scourge are formed first. And there's actually a line in here which is kind of awkward and interesting in that it says that, Unicron says that Cyclonus will become Megatron's ship. There's no mention, of course, of Cyclonus and his armada. But he calls it Megatron's ship just right before he takes Megatron and turns him into Galvatron. And that's where the issue ends. Before we get into issue number 2, it's something that dawned on me as I was talking here. I actually read this version of the story, I think, before I saw the film. So I was into the comics quite a bit, and I remember not seeing the film until probably 87 or 88. No, it was probably mid-87. I probably didn't see it until about a year after it came out. And I had heard characters died, and you can see it kind of in this issue, but there's nothing saying that any of the Autobots aboard the ship actually die. It's not as brutal. Like, they get shot, and then you don't see from them again. And it's not like the film where there's holes blown through them and smoke coming out of them. So you don't really get the feeling that all these characters died other than Optimus Prime. That said, it also kind of softened the blow of Optimus Prime dying. But then again, I'm pretty sure I saw bits of season 3 before seeing the film. And that would mean that it was kind of hinted at that Optimus wasn't around anymore. And I'm sure someone at school probably just ruined it for me as well. I wouldn't say seeing this first would ruin the movie for you, but it's certainly a different take to experience this before experiencing the actual film. And I don't think the first portion of this adaptation does the film justice, really. So moving on to issue number 2. And this one features a cover of the Sharktacon pit scene. It says the Sharktacon strike, and has Grimlock, Hot Rod, and Cup fighting in the pits there with the Sharktacons. And I always thought it's neat that they show Hot Rod firing out of his exhaust pipes on his wrists. I feel like that's an underutilized trick of his toy design, turning that into weaponry. And this issue, again, features the same crew as the previous issue, so we won't go through them. But it starts with Galvatron and company rolling up on Starscream's coronation. Galvatron doesn't say,
"Here's a hint."
Instead, he actually explains to Starscream that it was Megatron, and then kills Starscream and takes over. On Moonbase 1, Jazz and Cliffjumper are there getting ready to escape, and an interesting mistake here is that Cliffjumper and Jazz's colors are swapped. So Cliffjumper is in white and black, and Jazz is in red with blue highlights. And this would be a neat kind of toy thing to do at some point. Or, yeah. Or we have one of the few canonical appearances of Zoom Zoom. Who's Zoom Zoom? You're going to have to go onto the toy archive at www.tfu.info to find out. You can check the alphabetical listings, go to Z, and find it from there. Jazz and Cliffjumper try to make their escape, and the ship gets swallowed by a Unicron. Galvantron and company then go and attack Autobot City as they're repairing. They've also built a pair of shuttles there by Autobot City, just pretty much like in the film. They didn't build the shuttles in the film, but they mentioned building the shuttles in this script. The Autobots take off and eventually escape. On the Hot Rod Cup ship, we have Hot Rod training with the auto combatant, and he actually gets kicked in the butt by the auto combatant. The Decepticons pursue, and they fire their missiles. The Hot Rod and Cup, they do the reverse polarities gag and then flee the missiles. But as they're fleeing, Hot Rod and Cup's ship gets hit with a claw from a planet below. That planet will turn out to be Quintessa, but it's called Quintesson in this book. Galvatron fires on Ultra Magnus and company, and we get this funny moment, actually, in this scene as Ultra Magnus and Springer and folks flee. Ultra Magnus asks Perceptor to find a place to land for repairs, and he gives this long thing about, marginal navigational probabilities. And the next panel is just Magnus looking up, asking, why did I ask? Why? It's very, I don't want to say reminiscent, because this exists prior to IDW's More Than Meets the Eye comics and that version of Ultra Magnus, but you could definitely draw a line from this one panel straight to James Roberts' work in More Than Meets the Eye. In fact, I'm going to have to dig up this panel for social media to kind of post out there. I think that one is a lot of fun. So Hot Rod Cup and company crash on the planet, quote, Quintesson, as opposed to Quintessa, which is the actual name in the comics and cartoon. Thing here that is very different is that most of the Dinobots end up together, but Grimlock this time ends up with Hot Rod and Cup, which is far different than the film script. They get captured by the Sharkticons. There's no scene with the universal greeting. There are actual Sharkticons that capture them that they go willingly with, as opposed to the alligator cons or whatever those are, the crocodiles. I don't know what are those exactly in Transformers the movie. Whatever those ones are, it's not those body models used in this scene. They end up jailed with Kranix, just like in the movie. Kranix gets tried and executed, and then the Autobots are tried, and it seems similar to the movie, but Grimlock is there with them. Just then, as they're being dropped into the Sharkticon pit, Cup actually frees his bonds, and the other Dinobots arrive via Swoop, who give this long explanation of how they were following off in the distance, and of course they defeat the Sharkticons. In this scene, they need a ride back afterwards, and that's where Wheelie just appears and says, you get ship if I get trip. But he doesn't rhyme any other time while he's talking, and he appears in just this one panel, so there is no explanation of him showing up. He is never part of the story again, and we never get to understand why Wheelie is there in the first place. We then cut back to Moonbase 2. Something weird in the script here, and something I probably never really noticed with the first film, but the script calls it the second moon of Cybertron, and that means there's an order to the moons of 1 and 2. There's a first and a second. Moons and planets, you'd think that there would be just names for these things because they exist as celestial bodies in the sky. Numbering them or giving them a number order doesn't really necessarily make sense unless there was one before the other. So calling it the second moon is a bit odd, but that's where Moonbase 2 is, on the second moon, as opposed to Moon with a name and other Moon with a name. And of course, then we get, Bumblebee and Spike, and they try to blow up Unicron. And of course, Spike delivers his famous line from the film of, "It isn't even dented. We've failed completely." That's exactly what he said in the movie. And then the base and their ship is swallowed by Unicron, and that is the end of issue number 2. So we go on to the final issue in this trilogy, issue number 3, which features a cover of Unicron and a bunch of bots in robot mode. But Unicron's in robot mode. Dude, don't put the spoilers on the cover. Sure, it came out 2 months after the film, but still, don't put the spoilers on the cover. Ultra Magnus and company crash on Junkion, and Daniel gets his Spike's exosuit, which is actually red and blue in this scene. It looks weird, but you can get used to it. The Junkions are about to attack the Autobots when the Decepticons arrive. The Decepticons attack, and Ultra Magnus, much like in the original script, and actually in the audio script, if you listen to the audio of the original film, it really does sound like this. Magnus is drawn and quartered by the sweeps. And for more on that scene, and for a bit of a walk down memory lane relating to this particular comic book, I'm going to toss it over to the host of the Mike Seibert Radio Podcast, Mike Seibert.
So, after the movie had left theaters, but before it showed up on home video, it was a relatively narrow window of time, but there was a time where you literally could not watch Transformers the movie if you wanted to. So there were a couple few different ways to re-experience that story. Like our friends across the pond in UK had the Ladybird books, which I'm sure will show up in a later episode. There was the Marvel Comics 3-issue adaptation that we're talking about now here today. And then for me, my big thing, and we're going to unpack this later in the year, is the Diamond sticker book, the storybook told with trading card style stickers. It was really cool. But for now, I want to tell a story about issue 3 of Marvel Comics adaptation of Transformers the movie. Interestingly enough, I wasn't a regular subscriber to the Marvel Comics for Transformers or really G.I. Joe or anything else that Marvel was offering. So I would get issues sporadically, like at gas stations, supermarkets, places where you can't buy comic books today because I didn't have a dedicated comic book shop. So no direct market. And so, you're at that time, you're kind of left up to whatever the store manager chooses to order from Marvel Comics. So long story short is that issue 3 was the only issue of the Transformers the movie adaptation that I had as a kid. And much like my stories that I've told several times in several other places about my vivid memories of going to watch Transformers the movie twice in the theater, I've talked about Red Vines and Dr. Pepper and all of the other stuff. I have a very similar memory and story with this. There was a 7-Eleven near my house that was just outside of walking distance. But once I started learning to ride a bike, I was able to bicycle out to it, and they had 2 spinner stands of various comic books. I remember getting like a lot of like early X-Men, Daredevil, and obviously Transformers and G.I. Joe as well. And that's where I grabbed issue 3 of the Marvel comic for Transformers the movie. I grabbed it on my way to summer camp. So I don't know if it was still first run or, the memory gets a little cloudy with that, but I was heading off to summer camp and I had just enough money to buy like 2 or 3 comic books, and then also got myself like a medium Coca-Cola Slurpee. Again, the weird stuff that we remember. But I remember taking this comic to this summer camp with me. I was there, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks. I have no idea how summer camp goes for kids anymore. I do remember that I made some questionable toy trades. I remember I had a gung-ho G.I. Joe action figure that I traded for a pocket knife, which of course was almost immediately confiscated once I was caught with it. But I remember reading this issue over and over and over, and it kind of created this weird Mandela effect where I knew that I knew the movie. And I knew that this comic wasn't exactly the movie because, it's like the Matrix didn't look right. All of the colors were wrong. And it was just kind of like this weird psychedelic, I guess, take on, because, I mean, even then the characters weren't necessarily on model for the Marvel comics that were running at the time either. So it was really odd. So it's interesting. I didn't actually own the 3 issues of Marvel Comics Transformers, the movie adaptation, until like maybe 5 years ago. I just happened to find all 3 of them at a comic shop. My original copy of issue 3 had long since, gone to where well-loved comic books go to comic book heaven. I don't know what happened to it. But yeah, so I have another connection with this particular story. Now, anybody on the internet knows me. I am good friends with Aaron, Ryan, and Caleb, the Autopod Decepticast. And if you don't know, their show was for the first 86 episodes, a minute-by-minute breakdown of Transformers the movie. Now, very early in our friendship, they invited me to be a part of one of their episodes. It's episode number 50. It's still available on autopoddecepticast.com. And basically, that minute of the movie that we talked about was the death of Ultra Magnus. And I remember this very vividly and specifically from the comic when I read it as a kid, because it's one of those things that's obviously vastly different. So I thought, rather than trying to recount that story, I have the audio right here. I'm just going to play this for you. Yes, we are doing a clip within a clip within a podcast. So it's like I'm a dude disguised as a dude playing another dude, or however it goes. Anyway, check out this excerpt of episode 50 of Autopod Decepticast, where we are talking about issue 3 of the Marvel Comics adaptation of Transformers the movie. So I'm going to read a little bit from this comic book. Now, this was issue number 3 of the Transformers the movie adaptation from Marvel Comics. It was adapted by Ralph Macchio, and I have to warn you here, not the Karate Kid. The
not that Ralph Macchio.
Yeah, apparently this guy is like a guy that's a guy. Like, he's written like Spider-Man comics for like 30 years and is, a pretty prolific writer in terms of Marvel Comics. But he's trying to do a lot with a little in this comics adaptation. It's bonkers because like all of the speech bubbles are full of exposition. So they try to do a lot. So I'm going to try to get through this as best as I can. So we're going to pick up where Cyclonus and Galvatron kind of show up. Cyclonus comes to a halt in midair as Decepticon leader Galvatron leaps out to confront Autobot Chief Ultra Magnus. "So we meet again, Autobot fool. Unicron, the planet eater, informed me that you had not died in our last encounter and that I would find you on Junkion," Galvatron says. "You have something I desire. Give it to me now. Give me the leadership matrix."
He says, pointing at it. And I'm going to take pictures of this to, forward to you guys to put up on the website if you'd like.
Sure.
So Ultra Magnus is seen struggling with a prototype version of the Matrix. It's just kind of like a green block. And the caption reads, "The Matrix, an Autobot object of unbelievable power that was recently passed on to Ultra Magnus by the late Autobot leader, Optimus Prime. Why won't the Matrix open? Prime said the Matrix would light our darkest hour, and now I can't even remove it from its casing." To which
Pretty casual dialogue there. It's like, I can't get the cap open.
And also, way to show your hand to the bad guys in front of you.
Because Galvatron's right there. So the next panel, it's Galvatron pointing and kind of like what we see in the movie, and the sweeps over his shoulder. "The fool can't even make the leadership matrix works. Sweeps, quarter him," is the order. You turn the page. So it's a panel of Ultra Magnus standing. The 4 sweeps come down. There's laser beams emitting from them with sound effects that say spring, spring, spring with various I's and N's and G's. It's very dramatic. And then the next panel, no defense is possible as the stunned Autobot commander is lifted by the 4 Decepticon sweeps. And it shows him with laser ropes around his arms and ankles, and he's holding the green Matrix cube. Despite Ultra Magnus's great strength, the beams begin to pull his trapped limbs taut. Inexorably, and actually in the illustration, there's shaky lines, as he's being pulled. Inexorably, his body is stretched to the breaking point. Magnus says, I failed you, Optimus, failed you, and all those you left me to lead. I'm so sorry. So very sorry. And then in the next panel, he explodes, gets torn apart.
Yeah, we found a quick reference to this online. We're looking at this. That's really disturbing.
Isn't that brutal? That's the one. But then I love this because it kind of matches the movie. The Matrix just kind of falls into Galvatron's hands, and he says, just what I'd hope would fall into my hands. And the last panel is him holding the Matrix, not unlike the final movie, except if I don't know if you could see it on your version, but it's just basically it's a green cube. It kind of looks like a delicious lime jello treat, but it's got this weird plug on the side, like the cap that Ultra Magnus couldn't open or something like you were talking about earlier. Maybe it's some kind of weird plug of some kind. Nothing, Ryan, really?
No, well, I was going to say maybe it's a fleshlight.
Yeah, there you go. It's somebody.
Sorry, I was just looking. I'm sorry, I was lost in thought of I could fuck that cube.
We're so sorry he let you down.
I know. Right? I mean, it's like somebody's that thing, right? But yeah, so Galvatron says the leadership matrix of the Autobots, its power incalculable. Unicron, my master, in quotes. With this, I shall make you my slave! !
I do like the way the Matrix. Presumably that was. I think when that comic was written, they were working off of a mid-stage script.
Yeah, the movie wasn't done,
and so they didn't really have any sense of where the design of the Matrix would go. I like the way it went and on screen versus what we saw on the page there.
And also within that entire segment, we talk about some of the other script deviations. There's 3 different ways that Ultra Magnus actually dies. The comic book is the one that kind of shows from the original Ron Friedman script, and then there's a couple variations from there, and obviously the completed film. But anyway, that's episode number 50 of Autopod Decepticast, autopoddecepticast.com. As for me, my name is Mike. You can find me on Twitter at Mike Seibert Radio, as well as Instagram and Facebook. I am the host of the Mike Seibert Radio Podcast, which is nobody's favorite Transformers adjacent pop culture show. Back over to you, Ant. Thanks.
And I want to thank Mike for that little bit of clipception that we had going on. As he mentioned, you can catch the Autopod Decepticast and Mike Seibert's own podcast, the Mike Seibert Radio Podcast, just about everywhere you listen to this show. And I'm going to go on record and say that Mike's show is my favorite Transformers adjacent pop culture podcast. So back to the issue. Galvatron gets the Matrix and heads off to Unicron. Hot Rod and Cup and the Dinobots then arrive in the Quintesson ship, and Hot Rod does the universal greeting with the Junkions. The Junkions then reciprocate and rebuild Ultra Magnus. They then realize that the Quintesson ship is not enough to bring everyone back to fight Unicron, but we find out that the Junkions don't have a ship hiding in their planet. Their planet is a ship, and they have rocket boosters hiding in it in this version. And so the rocket boosters fold out from within under the junk in a Junkion, and the planet flies through space. We cut to Galvatron confronting Unicron, and this stays pretty close to the film in terms of script and results. Unicron transforms, takes Galvatron, swallows him, and attacks Cybertron. The counterattack begins with Shockwave leading the Decepticons. The ship and the planet of junk arrive, and Unicron shoots the Quintesson ship with I-beams, which causes the ship to crash into his eye and split apart. The Autobots inside fall various places, and we follow Hot Rod as he falls to where Galvatron has ended up as well. They fight. Hot Rod grabs the Matrix, becomes Rodimus Prime. There's no ghost of Optimus Prime in this scene, or the voice of Optimus Prime in this scene saying,
"Arise, Rodimus Prime."
Instead, he just becomes Rodimus Prime and defeats Galvatron and unleashes the Matrix in the name of Optimus Prime. And that begins to destroy Unicron. Unicron does rip his own leg off, as poorly animated in the movie as it was. It's also shown here in the comic version. The Autobots escape. Rodimus rolls up in his Winnebago mode, and there's no Cliff Jumper or Jazz in this scene, so we just presume they're dead, I guess. There's also no scene of Daniel, shooting the cover down to save Spike and Bumblebee. However, you do see, if you look real closely at the art here, two humans get inside of Rodimus Prime, so we can assume one is Daniel and one is Spike. And in the next panel, we'll see the Autobots in vehicle mode, including a Volkswagen Bug, which we can presume is Bumblebee. So they survive, but Cliff Jumper and Jazz, don't know. They survived, maybe, maybe not. It ends with Unicron exploding, and Rodimus Prime and the Autobots taking over Cybertron, reclaiming Cybertron, and proclaiming,
"Till all are one! Till all are one!"
But for more on issue number 3, I'm going to toss it over to my good friend, Gabriel Owens, the Salty Seaman.
Hey folks, Salty Seaman here, talking about the Transformer, the movie comic adaptation from Marvel Comics. As a kid, I only owned issue 3. Just giving a little bit of my memories of this comic, re-looking at it now versus then, and the kind of the piece of spoiler that it was. I'm trying to remember, I don't know if I'm pretty sure I read this first before I saw the Five Faces of Darkness, and I think I had a pretty good spoilers from people who had seen the movie and whatnot ahead of time. I knew what was going on. But I believe this was my first time seeing what the ending of the movie was, and obviously it's there's changes from the movie to the what the script was, what the movie ended up being, and what the comic is. Rereading it now, one of the things I noticed, one of the strongest memories I have is I didn't know, I completely misjudged what the Gretgar and the Junkions were saying, because I saw it here in written form first, which is pretty much the same quotes that they're doing from famous TV cliches, phrases, whatnot. And I just kind of pictured it, just because of the way it's written, very, very kind of deadpan. I didn't know Eric Idle and whatnot would be doing all these crazy sounds and voices. I just kind of pictured this really weird, almost ominous and creepy kind of deadpan, commercial jingles. I think that's what most kind of surprised me with the movie, because I didn't read the first 2 issues. But all the plot points are hit here, and I kind of figured it out. A lot more. There's a lot of exposition jammed into panels. That's fun to look at. I think it's 22 pages, and they're trying to cram in essentially the last third of this movie in here. So you get a lot of panels that just have a lot of dialogue boxes, and kind of skipping over the transformation of Unicron. I think that was like one of my bigger takeaways rereading it, realizing what a big deal in the movie that was. It's like a few panels because they just had stuff to get to, and they're hurrying this adaptation along. We get a few nice bits, Rodimus, pretty much straight goes to Galvatron, and he acknowledges who Megatron was before, the fact that he's he killed Prime. I think that bit of dialogue gave, his triumph over Galvatron a little more oomph. Though obviously I don't think there was ever any plans for that be the end of Galvatron or the Transformers series. But if it had to be, it was a nice moment, and I like the dialogue better in the comic. Anyway, that's about all I got to really comment on the adaptation here. The art felt like regular art from any Transformer comic. The way it was written is very Marvel style, which is also in style with the Transformers comic, and also an interesting adaptation of the movie script and what we eventually see of the movie. But beyond that, it's just I just find it kind of a weird artifact of Transformers at this state in 1986. That's all I got. Back to you, Ant.
And, of course, you can catch Gabe on his YouTube channel, youtube.com/recharge138 for more on that. And that's it. That is the comic adaptation of Transformers the movie. It's different enough. Certainly worth the read. It is kind of verbose in Ralph Macchio's style of over-explaining things. There's some things that really do happen and don't make sense, like Wheelie showing up and then disappearing. But there's really no motivation for why Wheelie needs to get off of Quintessa, or Quintesson as it's called here. But it's satisfying. Look, there's a reason why these 3 books are probably not worth a ton of money. Their cover price was 75 cents each. You could probably get them for about that much each if you look around. And if you can find them on a digital comic service like Comixology or something like that, give them a read. They're certainly not a waste of time for sure. And you probably blow right through it because if you know the movie, the scenes do read very quickly. One other panel I really liked in this one is Hot Rod getting kicked by the autocombatant. That's one I'm going to have to put out on social media as well. Now that'll wrap this episode of Transformers University. Of course, if you want to help out the show, and boy, I would love if you helped out the show because we are just 2 more patrons away, as I said earlier, from hitting our goal of 25. You can go to patreon.com/TFU.INFO, and for as little as $1 a month, you can get this episode at least a day early and a whole bunch of other little fun things. I post photos of my show notes from time to time, my handwritten show notes, some exclusive content as best I can, and chances to be part of the show. It's all there. So just swing on by patreon.com/TFU.INFO. Now, if you want to catch the show is in all of your favorite podcasting places. So Apple iTunes, or Apple Podcasts as it's being called these days, Google Play or Google Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, just about everywhere you could listen to podcasts, you can find this show. We're also up on YouTube, youtube.com/TFU.INFO. Please subscribe there. Subscribe wherever you do listen to the show so you're informed of the latest episodes. And, of course, if you can, comment, leave a review. Just do something to help us get seen. If you like the show, just please leave a review. Leave a review of this episode if you're listening on YouTube. And, of course, if you want to interact with me, the best place to do it is Twitter. But I do check everything. So if you leave a message on YouTube or on Patreon or even in the Apple iTunes reviews, I do read them. I do go and look at them from time to time. But if you want to reach out to me, the quickest way to do it is on Twitter, @TFU_info. It's the only one I got with an underscore. But that is where you can interact with me. That's where I post regularly. It's where I comment on the current news of the day. But you can also catch us on Facebook at facebook.com/TFU.INFO, Instagram at instagram.com/TFU.INFO, and of course on the web at www.tfu.info. One last thing to talk about before I let you know what we're doing next time around, and that is we are less than a month away from our New York Comic-Con coverage. It's one of my favorite things to do every year. Fortunately, I live in New York, so it's not a hard trek for me to get there. New York Comic-Con 2019. We'll find out the fate of the Unicron HasLab figure. We will be at whatever panels we can attend that relate to Transformers, and most likely we'll be part of whatever Hasbro decides to do for New York Comic-Con. So that is October 3rd through 6th. I will be live tweeting on Twitter, once again, at TFU_info. And I will be doing some sort of thing on YouTube, I'm sure. So youtube.com/TFU.info. Be sure to subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. So next time on the show, we're going to stay in the literary field, if you will. We're going to talk a little bit more about books from 1986. We're going to cover some Big Looker books. We're going to cover a coloring book that one of my listeners was able to dig up, and a little bit more. I don't want to give everything away, but it's going to be a fun time. We've got, 1, 2, 3. We've got 5 different publications to cover, including, I'm just going to read you the title, because if this title doesn't draw you in, I don't know what will, and that is the Big Looker book of the story of Wheelie, the wild boy of Quintesson. Once again, planet Quintesson, not Quintessa. You know, we don't argue about that one. We argue about Rumble is red and Frenzy is blue, but we don't argue about Quintesson versus Quintessa. Maybe we should. Where do you stand on that one? Let me know on Twitter at TFU_info. All right, that'll wrap up the show for this week. Until next time, I am your host, Anthony Brucali, owner, operator, madman behind TFU.info. Till next time.